Hello and welcome to the Politics and Media programme. Bailiffs collecting debt for local councils were sent out 1.8 million times across the UK last year. That's according to a report released by the Money Advice Trust a fortnight ago. After submitting a Freedom of Information request, the Trust found that the largest number of bailiff referrals were by Birmingham, Westminster and Newham councils. In Newham, the proportion of council properties receiving a visit from the bailiffs was close to 50%, with 56,000 referrals overall. The local councils we've contacted contend that they're simply dealing with cuts forced on them by central government and that the use of bailiffs is necessary. They stated, "We make no apologies for being robust and vigorous in our enforcement." But as Birmingham and Newham have some of the largest Muslim populations in the UK, how much does this action affect the Muslim community? And what alternative actions could the local authorities take? Here's Flaminia Giambalvo with more.
Local councils across England and Wales referred debts to bailiffs on 1.8 million occasions in the last year, new research has found. One of the most common debts to be referred to bailiffs was council tax arrears. The Money Advice Trust, a debt charity, has released the figures to highlight how often residents are pursued by debt collectors. The report concludes by stating that it is not economically or socially responsible for local authorities to continue to use bailiffs so frequently. Islam Channel spoke with Chris Richards, the founder and director of Council Tax Advice, who set up the debt charity in 2012 after having experienced firsthand what it means to deal with bailiffs.
In December of 2009, I fell ill and I managed to get myself into some council tax arrears, and I made an arrangement with the council to repay it by instalments. They didn't inform the council, didn't inform the bailiffs that was what I had done. And as a result of that, I ended up with bailiffs knocking on my door. When they turned up, I didn't know this at the time, but they misrepresented their powers. They told me that they were going to arrest me. They told me that if I didn't give them the keys to my car, they would take them from me by force, which is so synonymous with robbery. Ultimately, it ended up with me losing my vehicle, losing my job and falling ill. I spent the time that I was ill learning about the process and decided that there wasn't enough help out there to help people in this situation.
The report highlights that there is extreme variation across the 374 UK councils, with Newham and Birmingham figuring among the local authorities with the highest rates of bailiff referrals. Birmingham City Council referred debts to bailiffs on 82,329 occasions, equivalent to 17% of the total households in Birmingham. The London Borough of Newham referred 55,652 cases, equivalent to half of the total properties under its authority. Both councils have refused to take part in an interview, claiming that the figures are not entirely accurate. A statement given to us by Newham Council reads:
"Included are addresses where a series of failures to pay taxes or fines has occurred, and these result in several bailiff actions being issued to one address. So the actual number of Newham people involved is significantly less than the quoted figures."
The statement also adds,
"We have also suffered one of the biggest central government grant cuts of any council in the country. We make no apologies for being robust and vigorous in our enforcement."
In 2011, Newham Council passed more than 47 million worth of cuts. This included hundreds of job losses, a freeze on recruitment caps, and scaling back of essential frontline services.
I think it's economically viable for the council to continue to use bailiffs because of all the cuts, etc. Bailiffs don't cost anything for councils to employ. Many bailiff companies will have contracts with councils, but they earn their money from charging the debtor fees. As a company, we've approached the councils and said, look, we've got a better way we can do this for you, but it's going to cost you, £10 a client or something like that. And they're saying, well, sorry, it doesn't cost us anything for a bailiff to do it.
According to estimates based on the 2011 census, Birmingham and Newham are also among the councils with the largest Muslim populations in Britain, with Newham having the second highest percentage of Muslims at 32%. Over 40% of the population in both councils is from an ethnically diverse background, 30% of whom have established themselves in the UK over the past 10 years.
Well, the common complaint from other ethnic groups that don't speak English as a first language is that they don't understand the situation, and that the bailiffs will play upon that and use it to their advantage to gain access to a property or to collect money or whatever.
A growing number of charities are pressing councils to come up with sustainable alternatives to bailiff referrals, amid mounting concerns that in the drive to balance the books, local authorities are leaving some of their most vulnerable residents behind. Flaminia Jambalvo, Islam Channel.
Joining us now to discuss this, we have Tufik Kachimi, who's director of the Muslim Welfare House, Paul Crayston of the Money Advice Trust, and Mohammed Amin of the Conservative Muslim Forum. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Paul, it was your organisation that conducted this. Were you surprised by what you found out?
Yes, we were. The reason we conducted the research was that we get a lot of calls into our debt helpline services, that's National Debt Line and Business Debt Line, people seeking help with bailiffs attending their property for the collection of council tax and parking fines and even business rates. And one of the things we wanted to do was get a handle on just how often this was happening ahead of the welfare changes that are coming up. And we were very surprised that it was so high as 1.8 million, yes.
So do you intend to make this a kind of annual survey, so this will set the baseline and you'll know how the welfare cuts affect those figures? That's
right, yeah, that's the plan. And A, to see how the welfare cuts affect things, but also B, to see how effective we can be as a charity in campaigning for change.
Tufik, do you have any sense, I mean, we said in the introduction that this disproportionately affects the Muslim community. Do you have any anecdotal evidence about the scale at which bailiffs are now affecting that particular community?
We have 14 centres around the UK, which include Birmingham, London and many other main towns like Newcastle. And I can tell you that there's a large number of Muslim community particularly coming to us on a daily basis seeking help. The debts is only to increase. And with unfortunately the new policies of the government at national level or at local level is not really helping the people. The debts are only to increase. And on a daily basis we have large number of people coming and seeking help, telling us the problem of the debts and telling us the problem of the belief they're facing. And unfortunately the government right now is not trying to help these people with debts. They are actually increasing the problems by collecting the bailiff. Bailiff will always charge people more money. So what is the solution of this problem? So the thing which we can do for these people is giving them food. So we can't unfortunately help people to sort out people's debts, but the minimum thing we can do as an Islamic or community centres around the UK is to give people food. And you'll be surprised when you offer people food, they'll take it too. So the problem is really deep within the community, and we must think right now to sort it out before it increase even further.
Mohammed, are you surprised by the scale of the figures that the study found?
I'm certainly dismayed by the scale of the figures. I mean, we are all council taxpayers, and as council taxpayers, we have a vested interest in ensuring that when people incur a parking fine, for example, they pay it. And I think it's absolutely deplorable the number of people who are not paying parking fines until the bailiffs turn up.
Do you think it's a cost-effective way of enforcing the law, sending out the bailiffs on 1.8 million times?
Well,
that's 5,000 times a day.
If somebody has a debt which they're not paying, they've ignored correspondence, they've taken no action to pay, they've taken no action to negotiate, talk to the council and try to agree a payment plan, what else should the council do? Should the council ignore this and write it off? If they do write it off, that's a cost to you and me and every other council taxpayer.
So, Paul, do you think that there is an alternative to this?
I'm quite certain there is. We work with a whole range of creditors, actually, not just local authorities, but banks and credit card companies and all these kinds of creditors. And we try to improve their collections practices, and we've been doing that for about 20 years. We've had some success on one hand and less success on the other hand. The reality is, a lot of research shows that the best way to collect debt is by taking into account someone's entire holistic financial situation. That means how much money is coming into the household, how much money is going out, and how much is left at the end of each month to pay arrears. Now, council tax, as a good example, is a priority debt, is how we term it. It means it has to be paid before other debts. This means that when someone calls our services for advice, we tell them absolutely straight away, you have to make sure you're maintaining your ongoing council tax payments. That's absolutely vital. And then as a sort of priority ahead of your other debt payments, any arrears you have on council tax or parking fines, you have to pay that back too. And what we try and do is set people up on plans that they can actually afford on a month-by-month basis. And we found great success in that.
I mean, do you think this is the background to this is, do you think that the falling real wages is an element here? I mean, real wages in this country have been falling for, I think, 3 years now. That's the longest and a sustained fall in real wages since the Second World War. Do you think that's the background here?
I think the economical crisis and the climate we're living in is to blame for it. But again, I disagree with Mohammed when he says that people are not failing to pay their debts, car park or whatever it is, or council tax, whatever. It's their fault. It's not their fault. There is a circumstance, there is an environment of crisis we are living in. And unfortunately, most people affected are the ethnic minorities, and most of them are Muslims. If you look at the statistics in Newham, high Muslim population, high ethnic minorities. If you look at Birmingham, all other towns or places where these debts are collected, wherever there is ethnic minorities and immigrants coming up. And it is really hard for people to start and making their living in this country. The condition is so hard. So instead of helping these people to settle down, to learn their ways, to find a job so they can pay the debts, they actually increase their debts. It's not the way forward. And so we should not blame the people for not being able to pay. We should never say these people they can't pay, they're not willing to pay. They can't pay. This is the issue here. We need to sort out why they cannot pay and set up maybe payment installment or find a solution to why they cannot pay. Not enforcing them by other means or adding some more money into the debts. And furthermore, we have to look why these problem affect the ethnic minorities more than any other people. Why? We have to find out the solution to this problem, ongoing problem. It has to be now before.
Let me just put this point to Mohammed then. I guess, to put it in summary, it would be this: that it's all very well saying to people you should abide by the law, but if the social conditions under which they're living make that much more difficult than it was, say, 5 or 10 years ago, then something has to be done about that.
If you have a debt and you are having trouble paying it, the sensible thing to do is to seek advice, the Money Advice Trust, talk to the council, agree a payment plan. If you choose to ignore all of that, if you choose to do nothing, then don't be surprised if the bailiffs turn up.
But shouldn't we be saying to some of the employers, stop paying a lousy wage, and then people that are working for you will be able to do exactly as you suggest?
Employers pay the wage that is appropriate for the job, taking account the state of the economy at the time. Our government inherited, and the law. Obviously,
so what I'm saying is that shouldn't we alter the law so that they're obliged to pay a decent wage? I mean, that it isn't an unreasonable thing to set a minimum wage, is it?
We have a minimum wage, and the question is, should we raise the minimum wage? If you raise the minimum wage too quickly, all you do is you force people into unemployment. Because if you make people uneconomic to hire, they won't get hired.
Paul, do you think this has any connection here? Do you think there should be more rigorous enforcement?
That's a clear connect between the economic situation and the effect on the number of bailiffs being on. That's, of course, the case, because if you have people struggling economically, then it's less likely they're going to be able to afford their council tax. Of course, the debate as to how you then improve the economic situation can be had on both sides. And one thing that we've seen in the last few years is a real increase in people calling us who simply can't make ends meet. It's people in employment and unemployment, and their income simply won't stretch to paying their energy bills, their gas bills, their food bills. All these things have become much, much more expensive because inflation has been going up higher than the rate of average earnings. Of course, it costs more money, it takes more money out of your monthly income to heat your home, to put food on your table, to turn the lights on, to travel to and from work. All of these things take up more and more costs, and eventually things get pushed out, and for some people they're pushing out council tax. That might not be the right decision, but it certainly is something that's happening.
Yeah, and the other side of the equation, in terms of people being able to pay their bills, it's not just the wages question, and there's the whole area for welfare benefits and whatnot. How do you read this as affecting people's ability to pay?
Well, unfortunately, with these new reforms as well, it's affecting people deeply, and it goes deep into their pocket. Again, people cannot have their meat at the end of the day, cannot have their meal at the end of the day. So they have priorities here. And what they are going to do, of course, they are going to pay for their food rather than paying for the council tax or the fine for the parking. It's a choice people have to make. And it's not black and white, like some people describe. It's not like people choose not to pay because they don't want to pay. People, unfortunately, in this current condition we're living in, can't pay. And I call for the government to look for people who cannot pay and find proper measurement to secure their, end of the day, food, and then they can have the priority of paying car park fine or paying the council tax or other things.
I mean, Paul, looking at a sort of step beyond this, beyond the bailiffs, I mean, I think the last time I looked at the prison population, there's rather a high proportion of people in prison for relatively small debt default, isn't it?
It certainly happens that people can go to prison for debts, and that's one of the things that goes into saying your TV licence, your council tax should most certainly be a priority debt and one that you repay. We have to take a very, very close look at how we handle those more extreme situations. It has to be said there are far more people who end up sorting their problem out by hook or by crook than actually end up going into prison. But it is certainly a concern and something that we have to keep a close eye on.
I mean, in that sense, Mohammed, isn't it, you're making the cases for, employers being able to set wages at whatever level they find competitive. But in fact, what that does is it pushes the costs onto the state. The employer doesn't see the cost of bailiffs going out. They don't see they don't pay the cost of people being put in prison for relatively small debts. So really, what you end up advocating is a kind of welfare state for employers, isn't it?
In a free economy, wages are determined by negotiation, by the state of the market. They're not determined by somebody in Moscow's central office saying, you will pay this much for a plumber and this much for a welder. That isn't how the economy works in this country. It didn't work in the Soviet Union, which is why the Soviet Union fell apart.
I don't think that's an answer to my question. My question was, if the effect of allowing a free market for wages is to push the costs onto the state, therefore, what you're advocating is a bigger state. So if there's one person in discussion arguing for a big state, it would be you.
No. What you're arguing for is for somebody outside to sit there and specify what people should get paid. And apart from the minimum wage, which we have, it was brought in by the Labour government. The present government has no intention of abolishing it, although I'm not a fan of the minimum wage as a concept, but we have it. But the idea that somebody outside the business should determine what people get paid is simply nonsense.
What do you think? Is there any, Paul? Do you think there's any kind of calculation about exactly how much of state resources goes to sort of underpinning a low-wage economy?
Well, there isn't such a sort of broad figure, if you like, but there are individual examples. So that it's extremely expensive, for example, to the state to have to deal with something like rehousing an individual whose home has been repossessed. That costs a lot of money. Now, obviously, there's a creditor decision that happens before then. That's a private organisation, but it can cost several £1,000s for the government to then rehouse a family, very, very quickly at short notice. So there are some specific examples, but a broad brush figure simply doesn't exist.
Tawfiq, what do you think should be done here? If there's going to be an alternative to this, to sending in the bailiffs, what do you think would be the sort of main planks of that alternative?
I think the state have to plan the social justice. This is the main thing. We need to think about these people who cannot pay and create plans for them whereby they can earn a decent living and they can live in a decent way and they can pay their fine if they have to. When you look at the news today and you see millions have spent in the BBC, millions, and if you fail to pay your TV license, surely you will end up in jail or receiving the bailiff. This is one of the sources where we are wasting huge amount of money for nothing. What is best for us is to distribute this money equally to the people, especially people are deprived, the ethnic minority who do not have the same resources as the native people in this country. What is better? Shall we give them the social justice? Shall we give them time to settle down, to learn the language, to earn their bread and butter, or shall we just enforce and put them into a deeper crisis of debts? I think the government should set up proper policies to look at these people and find permanent solution for them, rather than pushing them deeply into their crisis.
You don't think that's a viable alternative, Mohammed?
The way for people to earn more is to have better skills, which is why the government is putting so much emphasis to its schools reform program. The other thing, of course, we're doing is we're controlling immigration so that people who immigrate to this country actually come here with skills that make them employable.
Paul, do you think that would work?
Well, it's a slightly broader question than the Money Advice Trust would probably be equipped to answer. The reality is that Unemployment, as a great example, tracks the demand for things like debt advice very, very closely. And we can see over the last few years that where unemployment goes up, demand for our services also rises. When unemployment goes down, then there aren't so many people struggling with their finances. So managing a successful economy that keeps unemployment down, that keeps inflation down, as I said before, is actually crucial to helping people with their debt problems.
That's an interesting point. Just let me sort of push that discussion a little bit further, because one of the kind of characteristics of the current recession has been, compared to previous ones, has been less an absolute, well, there's been a jump in absolute unemployment, but there's also a very strong characteristic of people being pushed into 0 hours contracts, into part-time work when they want full-time work, into casualised jobs. Does that have a similar effect on the kind of people coming to you?
Yeah, it does have a similar effect, although not an exactly the same effect, because it ultimately changes their finances ever so slightly. One of the characteristics that we've seen is a big jump in the number of people who actually look to sort of take on an entrepreneurial spirit and in the face of not being able to find employment elsewhere, start up their own businesses. And that's a positive thing. There's no harm in having more small businesses in the UK. But what we find quite a lot is that people don't have necessarily the business skills to run those businesses, and that's why we have a service called Business Debt Line that tries to help people in those situations. And actually a lot of the bailiff referrals that were mentioned in our study, a lot of that 1.8 million were for collecting for business rates. That obviously has a devastating effect, not just on the individual trying to run the business, trying to get a business growing, but also the local community. High streets are struggling already enough. We don't need to see bailiffs going in and closing down businesses.
Because the sort of success rate of start-up small businesses isn't high, is it? The very large numbers close within the first 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. And it's very, very difficult to get a small business off the ground. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of expertise and a not inconsiderable amount of luck. But as much help as we can provide and as much assistance as we can provide in the short term will maybe help them grow and become an employer, as Mohammed says, and actually help grow and improve the economy. So doing things like sending in bailiffs to collect business rates really does the economy absolutely no good whatsoever.
Tawfiq, do you think, briefly, do you think that if this doesn't get sorted, there's a kind of socially explosive layer building up at the base of the society?
I am 100% convinced that the riots which we saw 2 years ago will happen again and again, many, many times, because I can see in the ground, in the grassroots, there is social injustice happening, and this social injustice is only increasing day by day. And if these problems of debts and others will not be sorted as soon as possible, it's only to increase.
OK, well, that's going to bring us towards the end of the first part of the programme. We've been looking at the impact of central government cuts on the provision of services by local councils and the use of bailiffs. But in the second half of the programme, we'll be looking at one group of people who've been trying to capitalise on that, and that's the English Defence League. They were in Tower Hamlets last weekend, and there was a large protest against them. We'll be discussing that in the second half of the Politics and Media programme. Do rejoin us after the break.